I'm 30 years old now, but I still remember the exact temperature that Christmas Eve 23 degrees Fahrenheit. I know because I checked the thermostat obsessively that night, hoping the numbers would somehow explain why my parents hadn't come home. The house felt colder than it should have, even with the heating running. Or maybe that was just me, sitting alone on our worn plaid couch, staring at the Christmas tree we decorated together just 3 days earlier. My name is Sarah, and this is the story I've never told anyone completely. Not my therapist, not my closest friends, not even David, my husband of 5 years. Some wounds are too deep to share, even with those we love most. But tonight, as I sit in my own home, a real home, filled with warmth and love, I need to tell this story. Because 3 hours ago, my parents knocked on my door for the first time in 18 years. Let me take you back to December 24th, 1995. I was 12. Still young enough to believe in the magic of Christmas morning, still naive enough to think my parents' frequent arguments were just grown-up stress that would somehow disappear by morning. We lived in a small 2-bedroom house in suburban Detroit, where the winters were harsh and the economic situation was even harsher. Dad worked at the Ford plant when they needed him, which wasn't often enough. Mom cleaned houses for wealthy families in Birmingham, coming home exhausted and bitter about the life she felt she deserved but would never have. "Sarah, honey, Mommy and Daddy have to run out for a little bit," Mom had said that afternoon, adjusting her faded red scarf around her neck. She was wearing her good coat, the black wool one she saved for church and special occasions. That should have been my first clue. We'll be back before bedtime, I promise. There's leftover pizza in the fridge, and you know where everything is. I remember nodding, barely looking up from the book I was reading. I was an advanced reader, often lost in stories that took me far away from our cramped house and my parents' increasingly frequent fights. "Can I open one present early?" I asked, the question every 12-year-old asks on Christmas Eve. Dad appeared in the doorway, jingling his car keys. He looked nervous, kept checking his watch. "Maybe tomorrow, kiddo. Santa hasn't come yet, remember?" He forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Be good while we're gone." Those were the last words my father spoke to me for 18 years. I waited, thought how I waited. I ate the cold pizza, watching the clock on the microwave tick from 4:30 to 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock. Our neighbors, the Johnsons, had their Christmas lights flashing in patterns that painted our living room walls red and green. I could hear their family gathering, the sound of laughter and clinking glasses filtering through our thin walls. Children's voices, excited and happy. Everything I thought I'd have in a few hours when my parents returned with whatever mysterious errand had taken them away. By 9 p.m., I started calling relatives. My grandmother on Dad's side had moved to Arizona the year before. The phone rang and rang, no answering machines back then, just empty rings echoing in my ear. I tried my Aunt Linda, Mom's sister, but got a busy signal. This was before cell phones, before the internet, before any of the ways we stay connected now. I was truly, completely alone. The house creaked around me as the temperature dropped outside. I turned up the heat, but it didn't help the cold that was settling into my bones. This was a different kind of cold, the kind that comes from the inside out, from the slow, terrible realization that something is very wrong. At 11 p.m., I called the police. "My parents went out and they're not back yet," I told the dispatcher, trying to keep my voice steady. Even at 12, I knew crying wouldn't help. "How long have they been gone, honey?" "Since 4:30 this afternoon. They said they'd be back before bedtime." There was a pause. "And you're home alone? How old are you?" 12. They've left me alone before, but never this long. And never on Christmas Eve. The officer who came to the house was kind but tired. Officer Martinez. I remember his name because I'd see him many times in the coming weeks. He was probably in his 40s, with graying hair and patient brown eyes that had seen too much. He sat with me at our kitchen table, the one Dad had bought at a garage sale and Mom had covered with a plastic tablecloth decorated with sunflowers. "Have your parents been having any problems lately, Sarah? Money troubles? Arguments?" I fidgeted with the edge of the tablecloth. "They argue sometimes. About money, mostly." Dad got laid off again last month, and Mom's been working extra houses to make up for it. She's been really tired. Officer Martinez made notes in a small pad. Any idea where they might have gone? Family? Friends? I shook my head. We didn't have many friends. Mom always said she didn't have time for socializing. And Dad spent his free time either looking for work or drinking beer in front of the TV. Our family gatherings were small usually. Just us and whoever felt obligated to invite. U.S. We're going to make some calls, Officer Martinez said gently. In the meantime, is there anyone you can stay with tonight? A neighbor? Relative? The Johnsons next door barely knew us. The other neighbors were strangers. Our relatives lived in other states or weren't the kind of people you called in emergencies. I was beginning to understand how isolated we really were, how fragile our little family unit had been. I can stay here, I said. I know how to take care of myself. That was the first lie I told that night, but not the last. I didn't know how to take care of myself. I was 12 years old, and despite my advanced reading level and my tendency to act older than my age, I was still just a child who needed her parents. Officer Martinez stayed until midnight, making phone calls from our kitchen. I could hear him talking to hospitals, to other police stations, to the state patrol. No accidents reported. No Jane or Robert Chundos were my parents' names in any emergency rooms. No arrests, no disturbances. They had simply vanished. I'm going to have someone from Child Protective Services come by tomorrow, Officer Martinez told me as he prepared to leave. Just to check on you, make sure you're okay. Your parents will probably be back by then. But I already knew they wouldn't be. After he left, I sat in the living room, staring at our Christmas tree. We'd decorated it with the same ornaments we used every year, a mix of handmade ones from my elementary school years and cheap glass balls from the dollar store. The angel on top was crooked, one wing bent from the time it fell when I was 8. Mom had hot glued it back together, and you could still see the seam if you looked closely. Under the tree were 3 presents with my name on them. They looked so small and lonely in that big empty room. I didn't touch them. Something told me that opening those presents would make this real, would confirm that I was truly alone on Christmas morning. Instead, I pulled the Afghan Mom had crocheted from the back of the couch and wrapped it around myself. It smelled like her perfume, something floral and cheap from the drugstore. I closed my eyes and tried to pretend she was there with me, that I could hear her humming Christmas carols in the kitchen while she prepared our traditional Christmas morning breakfast of cinnamon rolls and hot chocolate. But the house was silent, except for the furnace cycling on and off and the distant sound of the Johnson family finally going to bed. Their Christmas lights went dark one by one, leaving our living room in shadows broken only by the colored lights on our tree. I must have fallen asleep on the couch, because I woke up to sunlight streaming through the front windows and the sound of a car door slamming outside. For one wild, hopeful moment, I thought it was them. I thought my parents had come home, that they'd have some explanation that would make sense of the longest night of my life, but it wasn't them. It was a woman in a gray coat, carrying a clipboard and wearing the kind of smile adults use when they're about to deliver bad news to children. Mrs. Patterson from Child Protective Services had kind eyes and a gentle voice, but her presence confirmed what I'd been trying not to believe. My parents weren't coming back, not today, not tomorrow, maybe not ever. "Good morning, Sarah," she said when I opened the door. "I'm Mrs. Patterson. Officer Martinez asked me to check on you. How are you doing?" "Honey?" I wanted to tell her I was fine, to maintain the lie I'd started the night before. But standing there in my rumpled clothes from the day before, with my hair tangled from sleeping on the couch, I couldn't pretend anymore. "I don't know where they are," I whispered, and then the tears came. All the tears I'd been holding back. For 14 hours poured out of me while this stranger held me in our doorway, murmuring comfort I desperately needed but wished was coming from my mother instead. That Christmas morning, instead of opening presents and eating cinnamon rolls, I packed a small suitcase with Mrs. Patterson's help and left the only home I'd ever known. The last thing I saw as we drove away was our Christmas tree, still lit up in the front window, the crooked angel watching over an empty house, I never saw my parents again. Until tonight. The foster care system in Michigan in 1995 wasn't kind to 12-year-old girls who'd been abandoned on Christmas Eve. I learned this quickly, moving from one temporary placement to another as caseworkers tried to find me a suitable, long-term situation. What that really meant was finding someone willing to take in a traumatized kid who had night terrors and trust issues. My first placement was with the Hendersons, a middle-aged couple who'd been fostering for years. They lived in Warren, about 20 minutes from my old neighborhood. Mrs. Henderson meant well, but she treated foster care like a business. She had 4 other kids in the house, all temporary, all damaged in different ways. She fed us, clothed us, and made sure we got to school, but there was no warmth, no real affection. We were her job, not her family. I shared a room with Keisha, a 15-year-old who'd been in the system since she was 7. She taught me the unspoken rules. Don't get attached, don't cause trouble, and don't expect anyone to really care about you. Foster parents come and go, she told me one night as we lay in our twin beds. Some are okay, some are awful, but none of them are forever. The only person you can count on is yourself. Keisha was wise beyond her years, hardened by experiences I wouldn't understand until much later. But she was also kind to me in small ways, sharing her shampoo when mine ran out, letting me borrow her books, teaching me how to do my own laundry. These tiny acts of kindness meant everything to a girl who'd been forgotten by the people who were supposed to love her most. School became my refuge. I'd always been a good student, but now I threw myself into my studies with desperate intensity. Books became my escape, homework became my purpose. My teachers at Lincoln Middle School noticed my sudden academic focus, but they didn't know the reason behind it. How could I explain that achieving perfect grades was my way of proving I was worth something, worth remembering? Mrs. Jen, no relation to my parents, just a cruel coincidence, was my 7th grade English teacher. She was a small, energetic woman who saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. She started giving me extra books to read, challenging assignments that pushed me beyond the standard curriculum. "Sarah, you have a gift," she told me one afternoon as I stayed after class to discuss a paper I'd written about of mice and men. "Your writing has depth, emotion. You understand human nature in a way that's unusual for someone your age." I wanted to tell her that trauma ages you quickly, that being abandoned teaches you about human nature in ways you'd rather not learn. Instead, I just nodded and accepted the next book she offered me, To Kill a Mockingbird, which would become one of my favorites. After 6 months with the Hendersons, I was moved to a new placement. The Johnsons, different from my old neighbors. LIVD in Royal Oak, and had recently become certified foster parents. They were younger than the Hendersons, maybe in their early 30s. And they'd started fostering because they couldn't have children of their own. Margaret and Tom Johnson tried harder than anyone to make me feel welcome. They converted their spare room into what they called Sarah's room, painting it pale yellow and letting me choose the bedding and decorations. Margaret took me shopping for clothes, something no one had done since my mother. She was patient when I had nightmares, sitting with me in the middle of the night and making chamomile tea, while I tried to explain dreams I couldn't fully understand. "It's okay to be angry with them," she told me one night after I'd woken up screaming. I'd been having the same dream walking through our old house, calling for my parents, finding only empty rooms. "What they did to you was wrong, Sarah. Being angry doesn't make you a bad person." For the first time since that Christmas Eve, someone had given me permission to feel angry instead of just sad and confused. The anger was liberating and terrifying at the same time. It gave me energy, purpose, but it also scared me with its intensity. The Johnsons wanted to adopt me. After a year in their home, they sat me down for the talk, the conversation where they asked if I'd like to become their daughter legally, permanently. I was 13, then old enough to have some say in the decision. "We love you, Sarah," Margaret said, her eyes bright with tears. "We want you to be part of our family forever. You keep your first name, but you could be Sarah Johnson if you wanted. You never have to worry about being moved again." I wanted to say yes. God, how I wanted to say yes. The Johnsons were good people who genuinely cared about me. They offered stability, love, a future I could count on. But something held me back, a stubborn, probably foolish hope that my real parents would come back for me. What if they come looking for me? I asked. What if they want me back? Tom and Margaret exchanged a look I was beginning to recognize, the look adults share when they know something a child doesn't want to hear. Sweetheart, Tom said gently, it's been over a year. If they were coming back, they would have by now. But I wasn't ready to accept that. At 13, I still believed in redemption, in happy endings, in the possibility that people could change and families could be healed. I asked for more time to think about it. That more time stretched into months. The Johnsons were patient, but I could see the uncertainty growing in their eyes. They wanted a daughter, not a foster child who might leave at any moment. Finally, when I was 14, they made the decision for all of us. We've been offered a placement for a younger child, Margaret explained, not meeting my eyes. A little boy who needs parents, not an older sister. We think it might be better for everyone if we focus on him. I understood. They'd waited 2 years for me to commit to being their daughter, and I'd been too afraid, too damaged, too loyal to ghosts to give them what they needed. They deserved a child who could love them completely. Without reservation, my next placement was with Mrs. Dorothy Williams, a 60-year-old widow who specialized in older foster children, the ones who were too old for most families to want, too young to age out of the system. Mrs. Williams lived in a large, old house in Ferndale that had been home to dozens of foster children over the years. Unlike the Johnsons, Mrs. Williams didn't try to become my mother. She was more like a stern but caring grandmother, setting clear rules and expectations while giving me the space to figure out who I was becoming. She had 3 other foster kids. Marcus, 16, who'd been with her for 3 years. Lisa, 15, who'd arrived 6 months before me. And Jeremy, 13, who'd come from an abusive home and barely spoke. Mrs. Williams ran her house like a benevolent boarding school. We all had chores, study time, and curfews. But she also encouraged our individual interests and talents. When she discovered my love of writing, she enrolled me in a creative writing class at the local community center. When Marcus showed an aptitude for mechanics, she helped him get an after-school job at a garage. I'm not here to replace your families, she told us during one of our weekly house meetings. I'm here to help you become the people you're meant to be, regardless of where you came from or what happened to you before. It was with Mrs. Williams that I began to truly heal. She insisted on therapy, real therapy, not just the mandatory check-ins with overworked social workers. Dr. Amanda Foster was a clinical psychologist who specialized in childhood trauma and abandonment issues. She was the first person who helped me understand that my parents' disappearance wasn't my fault. Children who are abandoned often blame themselves, Dr. Foster explained during one of our sessions. I was 15 then, finally ready to confront the guilt I'd been carrying for 3 years. They think if they'd been better, smarter, more lovable, their parents wouldn't have left. But adults make their own choices, Sarah. Your parents' decision to leave had nothing to do with your worth as a person. Intellectually, I understood what she was saying. Emotionally, it took much longer to accept. The guilt was like a splinter. Buried deep in my heart, sometimes I could forget it was there, but the slightest pressure would make it ache again. High school at Ferndale High was where I began to discover my own strength. I joined the newspaper staff, eventually becoming the editor my senior year. I wrote articles about social issues, student life, and occasionally pieces about the foster care system that opened my classmates' eyes to experiences they'd never considered. My English teacher, Mr. Rodriguez, encouraged me to apply for college scholarships. You have something to say, Sarah, he told me while reviewing my application essays. Your experiences have given you a perspective that colleges value.
Don't
let financial concerns stop you from pursuing your education. I applied to several state schools, focusing on journalism and English programs. When I received a full scholarship to Michigan State University, Mrs. Williams cried harder than I did. She'd seen dozens of kids come and go, but she told me later that she'd never been prouder of anyone's achievements. College was freedom in a way I'd never experienced. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who didn't know my story unless I chose to tell them. I could be just Sarah, not Sarah, the foster kid, not Sarah who was abandoned. Just Sarah, who was studying journalism and had strong opinions about campus politics. I threw myself into college life with the same intensity I'd brought to high school. I worked part-time at the campus newspaper, maintained a 3.8 GPA, and slowly began to build friendships based on shared interests rather than shared trauma. My roommate, Jessica, was from a stable, loving family in Ann Arbor, and being around her helped me understand what normal family relationships looked like. "Don't you ever wonder what happened to them?" Jessica asked one night during our sophomore year. I'd finally told her my story after months of deflecting questions about my family. "Don't you want to try to find them?" The honest answer was yes. And no. Part of me, the 12-year-old girl who still lived inside me, desperately wanted to find my parents, to demand an explanation, to give them a chance to apologize and make things right. But the rational adult I was becoming knew that some doors are better left closed, some wounds better left undisturbed. "I think about it sometimes," I admitted. "But what if I find them and they still don't want me? What if there's no good reason for what they did? I'm not sure I could handle that." Jessica squeezed my hand. "Maybe someday you'll be ready. Maybe. Someday you'll need to know, even if the answer isn't what you want to hear." She was wiser than she knew. During my junior year, I met David Chun, yes, another Chen, which initially made me uncomfortable until I realized the world was full of Chuns, and I couldn't avoid them all forever. David was a computer science major. Quiet and thoughtful, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He was the son of immigrants from Taiwan, and his stories of family expectations and cultural pressures were so different from my experience of family absence that I found them fascinating. We started dating slowly, carefully. David was the first person I'd let get close to me romantically, and I was terrified of being hurt again. But he was patient with my fears, understanding when I needed space, supportive when I was ready to share more of my story. "My parents want to meet you," he said one evening during our senior year. We were studying in the library, but I could tell he'd been working up the courage to bring this up. My first instinct was panic. Meeting parents felt too serious, too much like admitting I was ready for the kind of commitment that could lead to heartbreak. But David's steady presence in my life had begun to heal some of the wounds I thought would never close. "What did you tell them about me?" I asked. "That you're brilliant, beautiful, and the strongest person I know," he said simply. "They don't need to know anything else unless you want to tell them." The dinner with David's parents was awkward at first. They asked the usual parental questions about my family and background, but they were kind when I gave vague answers. Mrs. Chun, I forced myself to get used to the name, was particularly motherly, insisting on sending me home with leftovers and inviting me back any time. After graduation, David and I moved to Chicago together. He'd gotten a job with a software company, and I'd been hired as a junior reporter for a mid-sized newspaper. We found a small apartment in Lincoln Park, nothing fancy but ours, and I began to understand what it meant to build a life with someone you loved. We married 2 years later in a small ceremony. At Chicago's Botanic Garden, Mrs. Williams flew in for the wedding, crying as she walked me down the aisle since I had no father to fill that role. David's parents welcomed me into their family with warmth I'd never expected, treating me like the daughter they'd never had. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I belonged somewhere to someone. David and I built a good life together. We bought a house in Evanston. I got promoted to senior reporter. He started his own consulting business. We talked about having children someday, about the family we'd create together, but I never stopped thinking about my parents. Even in my happiest moments, there was a small, persistent voice in the back of my mind wondering where they were, what had happened to them, whether they ever thought about the daughter they'd left behind on Christmas Eve so many years ago. I hired a private investigator when I turned 28, a gift to myself, I called it, though it felt more like picking at an old scab. The investigator, a former police detective named Mike Sullivan, was thorough and professional. Within 2 weeks, he'd found them. They were living in Phoenix, Arizona. Dad was working construction when he could get it. Mom was a cashier at a grocery store. They never divorced, never had other children, never tried to contact me or find out what had happened to the daughter they'd abandoned. They were just existing, getting by, living quiet, unremarkable lives while I'd spent 18 years wondering if they were dead or alive. Do you want me to make contact? Mike asked when he delivered his report. I could reach out, let them know you're looking for them. I stared at the photographs he'd taken, surveillance shots of two people I barely recognized. My father had gone gray and thin. My mother had put on weight and looked older than her 51 years. They looked tired, worn down by life, but not desperate. Not like people who regretted their choices or missed their daughter. No, I said finally. Thank you for finding them, but no, I don't want contact, Mike nodded. He'd probably seen this reaction before. Sometimes knowing is enough, he said, and for a while it was. Knowing they were alive, knowing they were ordinary people living ordinary lives, helped me put them in perspective. They weren't monsters, they weren't heroes, they were just flawed. People who'd made a terrible choice that changed my life forever. But deep down, I think I always knew this moment would come. The moment when knowing wouldn't be enough anymore. When the past would demand its due, that moment came tonight. 18 years after I'd lost seeing them. When they knocked on my door asking for help, the doorbell rang at 7:43 p.m. on a Tuesday evening. In November. I remember the exact time because David and I were watching the news, and the anchor had just mentioned the time before going to commercial. We'd finished dinner, grilled salmon and roasted vegetables, a meal that would have seemed impossibly luxurious to my 12-year-old self, and were settling in for a quiet evening at home. Expecting someone? David asked, glancing at me over his reading glasses. He was reviewing code on his laptop, something he often did in the evenings. No one I know of, I replied, muting the television. We lived in a good neighborhood in Evanston, but unexpected visitors were rare. Our friends usually called first, and deliveries came during the day. The doorbell rang again, followed by a soft knock. Something about the tentative sound made me uneasy. It wasn't the confident knock of a neighbor or the perfunctory rap of a delivery person. This was the knock of someone who wasn't sure they'd be welcome. I looked through the peephole and saw nothing but darkness. Whoever was outside was standing to the side, out of view. My first instinct was not to answer David, and I had learned to be cautious living in the city, but something made me open the door with the chain lock still engaged. Through the 2-inch gap, I saw a woman's face, weathered and tired, framed by graying hair that might once have been the same auburn as mine. She was looking down, but when she heard the door open, she lifted her eyes to meet mine. I knew those eyes. I'd seen them in my dreams and nightmares for 18 years. "Sarah?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sarah, honey, it's Mom." The world tilted. I gripped the doorframe to steady myself, my heart hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. Behind her, partially hidden in the shadows of our front porch, stood a man I recognized, despite the years that had carved lines into his face and stolen most of his hair. My father. My parents, standing on my doorstep like something out of a fever dream. "Oh my God," I breathed, and then louder, "Oh my God." David appeared behind me. "Sarah, what's wrong? Who is it?" I couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't process what I was seeing. My mother, older, thinner, but unmistakably the woman who'd kissed me goodbye that long ago Christmas Eve, was crying now, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Please, baby," she said. "We know we don't have the right to ask, but we need help. We're in trouble, and we didn't know where else to go." "Sarah, who is this?" David's voice was sharp with concern. He could see I was in shock, probably sensed the emotional earthquake happening inside me. "It's them," I whispered, still staring at my mother's face. "It's my parents." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. David went very still behind me. He knew my story, knew what these two people had done to me, knew the scars they'd left. I felt his hand on my shoulder, warm and steadying. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice stronger now but still shaking. I didn't unlock the chain. My father stepped forward, and I could see him more clearly. He was so much smaller than I remembered, shrunken inside a too large jacket that had seen better days. His face was deeply lined, his hair completely gray, and there was a defeated quality to his posture that was painful to see. "Sarah, sweetheart, we lost everything," he said. "The house, our savings, everything. We've been living in our car for 3 weeks. We heard you lived here, that you'd done well for yourself, and we hoped. You hoped what?" The anger surprised me with its sudden intensity. "You hoped I'd just forget that you abandoned me, that I welcome you with open arms." "We know what we did was wrong," my mother said quickly. "We know we hurt you. But we were desperate then, and we're desperate now. We made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but you're our daughter. Our only child, please." "I was your only child 18 years ago too," I said. "That didn't stop you from leaving me alone on Christmas Eve." David's hand tightened on my shoulder. "Sarah," he said quietly, "maybe we should have this conversation inside. The neighbors. I looked around and realized we'd drawn attention. Mrs. Patterson across the street was openly staring, and I could see curtains twitching in other windows. Whatever this conversation was going to be, it shouldn't happen on our front porch. For the entire neighborhood to witness, but inviting them inside felt like a betrayal of the 12-year-old girl who'd waited all night for them to come home. It felt like saying their abandonment was forgivable. That time had healed wounds they'd never tried to mend. "Why now?" I asked. "Why here? How did you even find me?" My father looked ashamed. "We hired someone a few years ago. We knew we didn't have the right to contact you, but we wanted to know if you were okay. We wanted to know what happened to you after you threw me away like garbage." My mother flinched as if I'd slapped her. "It wasn't like that, Sarah. You have to understand." "I don't have to understand anything," I interrupted. "I was 12 years old. 12. Do you have any idea what that did to me? Do you know what it's like to be forgotten by the people who are supposed to love you most?" "We never forgot you," my father said, his voice breaking. "Not for a single day, what we did. It was the worst mistake of our lives. We've regretted it every day since." "Regret doesn't give me back my childhood," I said. "Regret doesn't erase the foster homes, the therapy, the years of wondering what I'd done wrong." We stood there in terrible silence, 2 generations of pain and abandonment facing each other across the threshold of my carefully constructed adult life. I could feel David behind me, solid and supportive, but this was something I had to navigate alone. "We're hungry," my mother said finally, her voice small and broken. "We haven't eaten in 2 days. I know we don't deserve your help, but if you could just close the door, Sarah." David's voice was quiet but firm. "You don't owe them anything," he was right. I didn't owe them anything. They'd made their choice 18 years ago when they'd decided their problems were more important than their daughter. They'd chosen their own survival over mine, and now they wanted me to choose their survival over my own peace of mind. But looking at them, really looking at them, I saw something that surprised me. I saw fear. Not just the fear of hunger or homelessness, but a deeper fear. The fear of facing the consequences of choices they'd made long ago. The fear of being rejected by the child they'd rejected first. They looked old. Older than their years, worn down by whatever had brought them to my door. My mother's hands were shaking, and I could see a bruise on her wrist that looked recent. My father kept glancing over his shoulder as if he expected someone to follow them. "What kind of trouble are you in?" I asked. My parents exchanged a look. The same kind of meaningful glance I'd seen pass between David and me countless times. Despite everything, they were still connected, still a unit. "Dad got involved with some people," my mother said carefully. "Bad people. We owe money we don't have, and they're not the kind of people who accept payment plans." "How much money?" $15,000, my father said. I was trying to make quick money to get us back on our feet. I got in over my head with some gambling debts, and then I tried to borrow from loan sharks to pay them off. It was a familiar story. Desperation leading to bad choices leading to worse ones. The same kind of downward spiral that had probably led them to abandon me in the first place. So you came here, I said. To the daughter you threw away, hoping she'd save you. You're the only family we have left, my mother whispered. The irony was breathtaking. I was their only family now, when they needed something. But I hadn't been family enough to keep when times got tough before. Sarah, David said softly, you don't have to decide anything right now. But it's cold outside and they look like they haven't slept in days. Maybe we could... No. The word came out harder than I'd intended. No, we can't. I can't. My mother's face crumpled. Please, baby. We know we don't deserve forgiveness, but we're your parents. Doesn't that mean something? You stopped being my parents the night you left me alone, I said. You were just the people who created me. I raised myself. Other people became my family. You gave up the right to call yourselves my parents 18 years ago. I started to close the door, but my father stepped forward, desperation making him bold. Sarah, wait. If you won't help us for our sake, think about what's right. Think about the person you want to be. Do you really want to turn away two people who are hungry and homeless, regardless of what they did in the past? It was a low blow, and he knew it. He was appealing to the values that had been instilled in me by other people, the foster parents who'd taught me compassion, the teachers who'd shown me the importance of helping others, the therapists who'd helped me understand that healing meant choosing to be better than those who'd hurt you. Don't, I said, my voice dangerous. Don't you dare try to manipulate me with guilt about being a good person. You lost the right to teach me moral lessons when you abandoned a 12-year-old child. But his words had found their mark. Because despite everything, despite the anger and hurt and years of therapy, I was a good person. I'd worked hard to become someone who helped others, who contributed to society, who made the world a little better. It was how I'd given meaning to my suffering by using it to become someone who would never cause the kind of pain I'd experienced. And they knew it. They'd researched me, learned about my life, my character. They'd come here not just because they were desperate, but because they knew I was the kind of person who might help them, despite what they'd done. One night, I said finally. One night and then you leave. You can sleep in the garage, there's a space heater out there. I'll give you some food and some money for gas, and then you go. You don't contact me again. You don't try to find me again. This is it. My mother's relief was palpable. Thank you, baby. Thank you so much. Don't call me baby, I cut her off. Don't call me honey or sweetheart or any of the names you used when I was a child. You gave up that right. I'm Sarah to you. Just Sarah. I closed the door, turned off the chain, and opened it again. My parents stepped inside my home the first time they'd been in any space I'd created since I was 12 years old. They looked around with obvious curiosity and something that might have been pride, taking in the hardwood floors, the carefully chosen furniture. The family photos that didn't include them, David was watching them with barely concealed hostility. He'd moved to stand between them and the staircase that led to our bedroom, a protective gesture that I appreciated more than I could express. This is my husband, David, I said stiffly. David, these are my biological parents, Jane and Robert. The formality was intentional and painful. David shook their hands because he was raised to be polite, but his expression remained cold. You have a beautiful home, my mother said, clearly trying to find safe ground for conversation. You've done so well for yourself. No thanks to you. David replied before I could say anything. His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it. Sarah built this life despite what you did to her, not because of anything you provided. My father's face flushed red. Look, I know you're protective of her. I'm protective of my wife, David corrected. Something you might understand if you'd ever protected your daughter? The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. I could see this evening spiraling into a confrontation that would help no one, least of all me. David, I said quietly, and he looked at me. In that look, I saw his love, his anger on my behalf, his willingness to throw these people out of our house if I said the word. Could you show them to the garage? I'll put together some food. He didn't want to leave me alone with them. I could tell. But he nodded and gestured toward the back door. This way, he said curtly, while David settled my parents in the garage. I moved through my kitchen like a sleepwalker, putting together sandwiches, fruit, bottled water. My hands were shaking and I had to stop several times to breathe deeply, to remind myself that I was safe, that I was in control of this situation. When David came back inside, he found me standing at the kitchen counter, staring at the bag of food I'd prepared. "You okay?"
he asked, wrapping his arms around me from behind. I leaned back against his chest, drawing strength from his solid presence.
I don't know how I'm supposed to feel about this. "However you feel is okay," he said. "There's no right way to handle this situation. No one should have to face the people who abandoned them as a child. They look so old," I said. "So broken. When I was a kid, they seemed so powerful, so important. Now they just look like people who've made bad choices and run out of options. That's what they are," David said gently. "That doesn't mean you owe them anything, but it might help you see them more clearly." I turned in his arms to face him. "What would you do? If it were your parents?" David considered this seriously. "I don't know. But my parents never abandoned me, so I can't really put myself in your shoes. What I can tell you is that whatever you decide, whether you help them or not, whether you forgive them or not, I'll support you." That was exactly what I needed to hear. Not advice about what I should do, but assurance that I wouldn't face the consequences alone. I took the bag of food and a thermos of coffee out to the garage. My parents had made themselves as comfortable as possible on the old couch we kept out there for when David worked on projects. They looked up when I entered, hope and wariness warring in their expressions. "Thank you," my mother said as I set the food on the workbench. "We really appreciate this." I sat down on David's desk chair, maintaining distance between us. There were questions I needed to ask, things I needed to understand, even if the answers wouldn't change anything. "Tell me what happened," I said. "That night. Christmas Eve. Tell me why you left." My parents looked at each other, and I could see them communicating silently, deciding how much truth to share. "We were in trouble," my father said finally. "Your mother's boss had been inappropriate with her. She complained to HR, and they fired her, said she was making trouble. We were already behind on rent, behind on everything, and losing her income was the last straw. We got an eviction notice on December 23rd, my mother continued. We had 3 days to come up with $1,200 or we'd be homeless. Your father had heard about some work in Arizona construction jobs that paid cash, no questions asked. But we had to leave right away to get there before someone else took the jobs. So you just ... We thought it would be temporary, my father said, his voice breaking. We thought we'd get established, make some money, and come back for you within a few weeks. We thought you'd be better off staying in your school with your friends rather than dragging you across the country to live in some motel while we got back on our feet. But you never came back, my mother was crying again. Everything went wrong. The jobs didn't pay what we'd been promised. We couldn't afford to come back, couldn't afford to bring you to us, and then time passed, and we were too ashamed to face you. Too ashamed to admit we'd failed so completely. You were ashamed? I could hear my voice rising, feel the old anger surfacing. I was 12 years old, and you were ashamed? Do you have any idea what I went through? Do you know what it's like to be processed through the foster care system like a piece of unwanted furniture? We know, my father said. We hired the investigator a few years ago, remember? We know about the foster homes, about Mrs. Williams, about college. We know you succeeded despite us, and we're proud of you for that. Don't you dare say you're proud of me, I snapped. You don't get to be proud. You weren't there for any of it. You didn't earn the right to take pride in my accomplishments. You're right, my mother said quietly. We don't have the right to anything. We know that. But we want you to know that we never stopped loving you. Even when we were too cowardly to come back, even when we convinced ourselves you were better off without us, we never stopped loving you. Love isn't enough, I said. Love doesn't mean anything without action, without commitment, without showing up. You can't love someone and abandon them. Those two things cancel each other out. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of 18 years of hurt and regret filling the small space. Outside, I could hear the normal sounds of our neighborhood cars passing. Dogs barking, the everyday life that had continued while my world had been turned upside down. "What do you want from me?" I asked finally. "Really? Do you want money? Do you want forgiveness? Do you want a relationship? What do you actually want?" My parents looked at each other again, and I could see them struggling with how to answer. "We want a chance," my mother said. "Not to go back and change what we did. We know that's impossible. But a chance to be part of your life going forward. A chance to try to make up for some of what we put you through." "And if I say no? If I give you some money and tell you never to contact me again?" "Then we'll respect that," my father said. "We'll disappear again, and you'll never have to see us or think about us. We had to try. We had to take this one chance to see if there was any possibility of redemption." There was that word again, redemption. It seemed to follow me through life, this question of whether people could change, whether the worst mistakes could be forgiven, whether love could overcome. Abandonment. "I need time to think," I said, standing up. "You can stay tonight, like I promised. Tomorrow morning you need to leave. After that, I don't know, I need time to process this." "Thank you," my mother said. "Just for tonight, for this chance. To see you and know you're okay, that's more than we deserved." I left them in the garage and went back into the house, where David was waiting with a cup of chamomile tea and worried eyes. "How did it go?" he asked. "They told me why they left," I said, sinking onto the couch beside him. "Money troubles, job opportunity in Arizona, thought it would be temporary. The usual story of good intentions and terrible execution." "Do you believe them?" I considered this. I think I believe that's what they told themselves at the time. Whether it's the whole truth, I'm not sure it matters. The result was the same. Either way. David handed me the tea, and I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, grateful for something to anchor me to the present moment. "What are you going to do?"
He asked. "I have no idea," I admitted.
"Part of me wants to help them, to give them money and resources to get back on their feet. Part of me wants to call the police and have them removed from our property. Part of me wants to scream at them for 18 years worth of anger and pain. And part of me just wants to pretend this never happened. All of those reactions are valid," David said. "You don't have to choose just one." That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, hyper-aware of my parents' presence in our garage. It felt surreal, having them so close after so many years of absence. Every time I started to drift off, I'd remember they were there, and my heart would race with a mixture of anxiety and something I didn't want to acknowledge. Trace of the love I'd felt for them when I was 12 years old. David slept fitfully beside me, and I knew he was worried about me, about how this unexpected confrontation with my past would affect the life we'd built together. He'd seen me work through my abandonment issues in therapy, had held me through nightmares and panic attacks, had celebrated with me as I'd learned to trust and love again. The last thing either of us wanted was for old wounds to be torn open, but maybe they needed to be opened. Maybe some wounds never really heal until they're properly cleaned and examined. Maybe facing my parents, seeing them as the flawed, struggling people they'd always been rather than the powerful figures who'd loomed so large in my memory, was necessary for my own continued healing. Around 3 a.m., I got up and walked to the kitchen window that overlooked the garage. There was a light on inside, and I could see shadows moving around. They were awake too, probably talking about this strange reunion, about their chances of rebuilding a relationship with the daughter they'd abandoned. Tomorrow, I would have to make a decision that would affect the rest of my life. I could help them or turn them away, forgive them or hold on to my anger, try to build something new or protect what I'd already built. There were no easy answers, no clear right or wrong choices, but for the first time in 18 years, I had the power in this relationship. I was the one who could choose what happened next, who could set the terms and boundaries. They were the ones asking for help, for forgiveness, for a chance. The 12-year-old girl inside me, who'd waited all night for them to come home, was finally going to get to decide whether they were worth waiting for. I woke up before dawn, my body tense with the knowledge that today would change everything, one way or another. David was still sleeping, his arm draped protectively over me, even in unconsciousness. For a moment, I lay still and tried to imagine what our life would look like after today. Whether it would include my parents in some capacity or whether I'd be closing that door forever. The decision felt impossibly heavy. 18 years of therapy had taught me that I had the right to protect myself, to prioritize my own healing and well-being. But those same 18 years had also taught me about forgiveness, not the kind that excuses harmful behavior, but the kind that frees you from carrying someone else's sins. I slipped out of bed and made coffee, standing at the kitchen window. As the sky gradually lightened, the garage was quiet now, and I wondered if my parents had finally fallen asleep, or if they were lying awake too. Wondering what today would bring. By 7 o'clock, David was up and moving around the kitchen, preparing for what we both knew would be a difficult conversation. He didn't ask if I'd made a decision. He knew me well enough to understand that I was still processing, still weighing options that all felt wrong in different ways. "Whatever happens today," he said, pulling me into his arms, "we'll get through it together." I held on to him tightly, drawing strength from his steady presence. "I keep thinking about the person I want to be," I said. "The person I've worked so hard to become. And I'm not sure that person would turn away two desperate people, even if they are the people who hurt me most. The person you've become is someone who has healthy boundaries," David reminded me. "Someone who knows her own worth. You don't have to sacrifice that to prove you're a good person." He was right, but it didn't make the decision any easier. I'd spent my entire adult life trying to be better than my circumstances, better than the people who'd failed me. Now I had to decide if being better meant extending grace to those who'd shown me none, or protecting the peace I'd worked so hard to build. At 8 o'clock, I walked out to the garage with a thermos of coffee and a plate of toast. My parents were awake, sitting side by side on the old couch, looking like refugees in their own lives. They tried to tidy up the space, folding the blankets I'd given them and organizing their few possessions into neat piles. "Good morning," my mother said softly. There were dark circles under her eyes, and I could tell she hadn't slept much either. "Did you sleep at all?" I asked, setting the coffee and food on the workbench. "A little," my father said. "It's been a while since we've slept somewhere warm and safe." "We're grateful for that, Sarah. More grateful than you know." I sat down across from them, studying their faces in the morning light. They looked older then. They had the night before, more fragile. Without the cover of darkness and the adrenaline of their desperate arrival, they just looked like what they were, two people in their early 60s who'd made too many wrong choices and run out of second chances. "I've been thinking all night," I said. "About what you told me, about what I want to do, about what kind of person I want to be." They waited, not daring to speak, probably afraid that anything they said might tip the scales against them. "You want to know the hardest part about being abandoned?" I continued. "It's not the practical stuff, the foster homes, the uncertainty, even the fear. It's the questions that never get answered. Why wasn't I enough? What did I do wrong? How do you just stop loving your child?" My mother started to cry again, but I held up a hand to stop her from speaking. For 18 years, I've carried those questions. They've shaped every relationship I've ever had, every decision I've ever made. I've spent thousands of dollars on therapy trying to understand how parents could just walk away from their child. And now you're here, and I finally get to ask you directly, how do you do that? How do you leave your 12-year-old daughter and never come back? "We were cowards," my father said simply. "We were scared, overwhelmed, and we made the worst possible choice. And then we were too ashamed to face what we'd done, so we kept making the same choice over and over again. Every day we didn't come back for you, we became more convinced that we'd destroyed any chance of being your parents again. We told ourselves you were better off without us," my mother added. "That you'd been placed with good people who could give you things we never could. It was easier to believe that than to face the truth, that we were just too selfish and weak to do what was right." "But you loved me?" I asked. "When you left, did you love me?" "Yes," they said in unison, and I could hear the pain in their voices. "Then, how? How do you love someone and abandon them? My father was quiet for a long moment. Love isn't always strong enough, he said finally. That's the hardest lesson we learned. We loved you desperately, but we loved our own fear more. We loved our pride more. We loved our shame more. We let all of those things be bigger than our love for you. And that's something we'll have to live with for the rest of our lives. It wasn't the answer I'd expected, but it was honest in a way that surprised me. They weren't trying to excuse their behavior or minimize the damage they'd done. They were owning it completely and without reservation. The investigator, I said. What did he tell you about my life? That you were brilliant, my mother said. That you'd graduated summa cum laude from Michigan State. That you'd built a successful career in journalism. That you'd married a good man who loves you. That you'd survived what we did to you and become someone remarkable. He also told us that you'd been in therapy for years, my father added. That you'd struggled with trust issues and abandonment fears. That our choice had consequences that followed you into adulthood. We know we damaged you, Sarah. We know our mistakes became your burden to carry. They did, I said. But they also became my strength. Everything good in my life, I had to fight for. Every relationship, every achievement, every moment of happiness, I had to earn it twice as hard because I started from a place of being unwanted. You were never unwanted, my mother said fiercely. You were the best thing that ever happened to us. The only thing we ever did right. Then why wasn't that enough? To make you stay? The question hung in the air between us, 18 years of pain compressed into 7 words. This was the heart of it, the wound that had never fully healed despite all my therapy and self-work. How do you reconcile being someone's best thing with being someone they could walk away from? Because we were broken people, my father said. Broken people break things, even the things they love most. Especially the things they love most, sometimes. We weren't equipped to be parents, Sarah. We should have realized that before we had you, but we didn't. And when the pressure got too intense, we cracked. You could have taken me with you, I said. To Arizona. I would have gone anywhere with you. I would have lived in a car, in a motel, anywhere, as long as we were together. We thought we were protecting you from that, my mother said. We thought leaving you behind was the selfless choice keeping you in school, in your home, rather than dragging you into our mess. But you never came back to check on me. You never called. You left me completely. We were going to, my father sighed. We planned to come back within a month, 2 at the most, but everything went wrong. The jobs weren't what we'd been promised. The money ran out. We couldn't afford gas to drive back to Michigan. And then weeks turned into months, and months turned into years, and we convinced ourselves that coming back would be more disruptive than staying away. You convinced yourselves that abandoning me was actually good for me? People can convince themselves of anything when the truth is too hard to face, my mother said. We became experts at lying to ourselves about what we'd done and why. It was easier than admitting we'd failed you so completely. I sat back in my chair, processing their words. They weren't offering excuses, they were offering explanations. There was a difference, and it mattered. An excuse would have tried to justify their actions, to make them seem reasonable or necessary. An explanation just acknowledged the ugly truth of how fear and shame can compound into something monstrous. I have conditions, I said. Finally, hope flickered in their eyes, but they waited for me to continue. If I help you and I haven't decided that I will, it won't be because I forgive you. Forgiveness is something I might work towards someday, but I'm not there yet. It would be because helping people in need is who I choose to be, regardless of who those people are. They nodded, not daring to speak. Second, if I help you, it's not an invitation back into my life. It's not the beginning of a relationship or a reconciliation. It's just help one time because you need it and I can provide it. We understand, my father said. Third, you need to get professional help, both of you. Not just for whatever immediate crisis brought you here, but for the underlying issues that led you to abandon your child. If you're serious about being different, people than you were 18 years ago, you need to do the work to change. We will, my mother promised. We'll do whatever you think we should do. And finally, I said, my voice getting stronger, you need to understand that helping you might be the closure I need to move forward with my life. It might be my way of saying goodbye to you permanently. Don't mistake practical assistance for emotional reconciliation. They absorbed this in silence, and I could see them trying to decide if help with conditions was better than no help at all. What kind of help are we talking about? My father asked carefully. I'd been thinking about. It's all night. I'll give you $5,000 enough to pay off your debt and get you started somewhere new. I'll help you find a place to live, maybe connect you with social services that can provide ongoing support, but that's it. After that, you don't contact me again, unless I contact you first. It was more than I planned to offer, but less than they probably needed for a complete fresh start. It was practical help without emotional investment, assistance without absolution. Sarah, my mother said, we can't accept that much money from you. We know we don't deserve. This isn't about what you deserve, I interrupted. This is about who I am and what I can live with. I can live with helping you get back on your feet. I can't live with wondering if you're dead in a ditch somewhere because of debts you couldn't pay. They looked at each other, communicating in that silent way long-married couples do. Then my father nodded. We accept your conditions, he said. All of them, and Sarah. We know this doesn't make up for anything, but we want you to know that the person you've become, the person who would help people who hurt her, that's not despite us. That goodness in you, that strength and compassion, that came from you. We may have failed you as parents, but you succeeded as a human being, and that's all you. It was the right thing to say, and I hated that it affected me. I didn't want to feel anything positive toward these people who'd caused me so much pain, but I couldn't deny that his words touched something deep inside me. I'll make some calls. Today, I said, standing up. Get you connected with resources, help you figure out next steps. But you need to leave my property by tonight. You can get a hotel room while we sort things out. Of course, my mother said. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for being better than we ever were. I walked back to the house, my heart pounding with the magnitude of what I'd just committed to. David was waiting in the kitchen, and one look at my face told him everything he needed to know. You're going to help them, he said. I'm going to help them leave, I corrected. There's a difference. He pulled me into his arms and I let myself lean into his strength. Are you okay with this decision? I don't know if I'm okay with any decision, I said honestly, but this is the one I can live with. I can't save them, and I can't undo what they did to me. But I can help them get out of my life permanently, and maybe that's worth $5,000. After setting clear boundaries with her estranged parents, the narrator helps them rebuild their lives, arranging housing, debt counseling, and support in a new city. Though emotionally complex, she finds peace in giving them a second chance, not for their sake, but for her own healing. Months later, a respectful letter confirms they are trying to change. As she discovers she's expecting her first child, the narrator reflects on how her parents' failures taught her how to be the kind of parent she never had. By choosing compassion over bitterness and committing to breaking the cycle of abandonment, she finds strength, peace, and a deeper sense of purpose. Her true victory lies not in revenge or forgiveness, but in becoming the parent she once needed, and giving her child the love and stability she was denied.